We simply can't be creative every time we turn on our gear. Sometimes we're just out of ideas, or everything we try just sounds flat. Rather than just switch it all off, give up and come back next time, I like to lean into these times of stale inspiration and let our gear do some of the heavy lifting. Modulation, not procrastination. A guide to patching for when it feels like all hope is lost. Generative patching. I know it's not everybody's cup of tea, but hear me out for a second. Everyone's been there in the studio, you fire up everything, you get super excited, but all you make is just crap. Moments like these make me question what I'm doing and just giving it all away. But I'm a resilient person and I really try to find a way to stay with my gear for as much time as I can, because time is very valuable to me. So I wanted to share some of that today of what helps me stay in the studio when everything feels like it's against me, because sometimes we don't need diamonds, all we need is dirt. So for today we've got the Digitone keys, which is handling all of our MIDI and also all of our generative sounds. The Moog Miniature is being controlled by the Digitone, and that handles all of the drone and bass sounds. And then all the audio is routed into the Model 12 through these two tracks here. Pretty simple setup, nothing fancy. I think the best way to show this example is just by continuously letting this patch run as we make it. And I think that's really the point of this style of patching anyway, is to just not achieve anything in particular, but just let it run itself as we sort of figure out how it wants to sound. I'm going to begin by heading over to my MIDI section on the Digitone, and I've already set this up, but it's pretty simple. It's just coming out channel 1, that's going to the Moog. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change the length of the sequence. So I'm just going to make it like something kind of random, like 27, all right? I'm just going to play some simple bass notes. Let's just make everything infinite. Now I'm just going to really relax this probability. Put it down to something like 33%. And my first trigger, I'm just going to make that first and only, so that when I start the sequence, it's going to trigger on the first time and only then. So I'm just going to hit play and let it just run. I'm going to really lower this probability down so that it doesn't trigger very often at all. So now that we've got that running, I think it's pretty simple. It's just a nice drone in the background. So generative music is an idea that was made famous by Brian Eno. It means music that's generated by a system. Music that is ever changing, ever different. When we think of generative music, we think of systems playing themselves and continually changing the way the music sounds on their own accord. And this is usually due to a set of rules that we, the artist, program into the system to make sure that it follows certain patterns properly, but still has the freedom to run off on its own. Traditionally, those systems were modular synthesizers, and they still are, but with virtual synthesis and virtual instruments, we now have access to a lot more ways to patch and a lot more ways to get modulation happening in complex systems. You could really consider an instrument like the Digitone to be a system in itself, because it has such capacity to modulate things, and it really has a lot of awesome functions that lean into generative patching. Why Elektron gear really excels at this is because it has so many ways to introduce chance into your sequence through functional triggers, conditional triggers, p-locking, and just the way the sequencer works in general really leans itself to ever-changing and ever-flowing, that definition of generative music. And the more you lean into that, the more you realize that Elektron systems are actually really powerful at that. So now I'm going to begin by just showing you the sounds that I've made on the Digitone. I don't really want to make them in front of you, but these are the sounds. So a very dissonant sort of sound, but I want to change the scale. I mean, I already know what scale I want. I know what this scale is. This is in F sharp, and I want to make it the Hirajoshi scale. So I'm just going to go ahead and program this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make it per track, and I'm going to make the length of it infinite. If I push down there, you can see it turns to infinite. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make this one a really random length as well, like something like 47 or something, and that's just going to make sure that it just turns over in a really strange, lengthy way. So I'm just going to enter a bunch of these notes and then again change the probability. So why bother? Why bother going through all of this effort just to noodle around and not really make anything? Us musicians and creators and producers, we're always chasing that little drug of validation from what we've made. And in order to get there and get that from others, we need to have made something. We need to have produced something. And I really vie for this attitude of it's not about the production that you've created, it's actually about all of this work that you've done to get there as an artist. That is where we love to spend our time in, and that is where all of our enjoyment doing this comes from as producers and artists and musicians. We often forget that because we're so interested in the end. We're so focused on the end, and that's what makes us good. We get judged by that, and that's understandable to want to get there. But it is really important to just slow down and remember that the journey there is really important. It's just as important to enjoy the process and be a part of that process and spend as long in it as you want to. Our uncreative moments are always there. They're just as frequent as our creative moments. No one is effervescent as a creator. I think we can trick ourselves into procrastinating on something else that's actually productive, but productive in a different way. Something that can be productive for a different pathway in our brain and open up a new door for our creativity and our artistry to really grow ourselves and our skills. I'm gonna add a little second melody here. This is our second sound. So I like the chords there. I think those are cool. When we're making beats, we're often just focused in really knuckling down and all these critical elements of the project, like, okay, the bridge needs to be fleshed out and the drums needs a bit of change here and this melody's not working. We're really focused and hyper fixated. Whereas when you're working inside something like a patch, you're sort of just allowing it to run itself and just being a part of the sound that's happening at that moment. But it's not as intense and as heavy a workload as just knuckling down and producing a song or making a track. Maybe it's not for you, and I totally understand that. I'm not trying to push people in the direction of doing this, but I just think this really works for me on my down days. So yeah, that's my sort of reasoning behind it. I think it's a really good thing to do for you and for, yeah, just your creative headspace in general. This channel really covers a lot of that type of stuff, like the perspective of a producer and how we sort of deal with our own mental unwindings in this space. Like, it's an important thing to think about. A lot of people are just productive, but actually what's really important in our life as a producer is our unwinding and our relaxation. It doesn't matter what you find, it's just about challenging that perspective of productivity, changing the way that you look at productivity and saying, okay, if I'm not going to be productive right now, can I be adaptive? Can I be still learning and still making and still creating, but just not from a productive lens? So I'm just gonna have a bit of a jam and noodle around and let the video play out a bit. Thanks for tuning in. Until next time, have a good one.